invaded by this alternate parallel world that by all accounts looks almost the same as our world. All the buildings are in the same place. All the roads are in the same place. But when you're there, if you could see it, it is filled with rot and decay and monsters and darkness. And they call that world the Upside Down. And it's a lot of fun if you're into that sort of thing. But as I watch that show, and I see this sort of thing a lot in pop culture. I'll be watching a show, just trying to unwind, just trying to hang out with Rachel, and I'll pause it, right? And I'll be like, man, that directly relates to this aspect of the gospel. Like anytime I watch anything with zombies in it, I'm like, yep. We're just walking around in this world dead. And the only solution is if God would give us back our life. We're the moving around spiritually dead until Jesus saves us. And Rachel's like, can we get back to the show, please? I said, yes. Or another one. This one trips me out every time. I can't even watch this show anymore for this reason. Finding Nemo, where the son, his child, is lost, but the father will stop at no lengths to save his children. So I want you guys to be on the lookout for that. It's an additional assignment. Write it down in your folders. Nathan said, find the gospel in pop culture. Okay? That's a good way to start off conversations. But in this world of Stranger Things, where they have this upside down, I said, you know what? This world is the upside down. Because even though it looks nice and comfortable, we have nice things like root beer and crab meat and all my favorite things. I don't know. What do you like? This world is filled with darkness and decay, and it's breaking down. And as a matter of fact, in a certain sense, even monsters, which are us apart from Jesus the Most High. That there is a world that's right side up. But for those of us outside of Christ, we may not even know it. And we're walking around in this world as though this is all there is. And this world has a certain set of rules that are completely backwards to the way that God wants us and desires for us to live for our benefit. We've explored a few of them already. We've explored how even though as you walk through this world, everything says, look, you just look out for number one. Be as selfish as you can until you make it to the finish line. That you should be self-focused instead of other-focused. And you should be completely independent. The moment that you depend on someone or something else, you're in danger. But in God's right-side-up kingdom, he says, no. I want you guys to be others-focused. Express the love to one another that I have shown towards you. I want you to be 100% completely dependent on me. And I know it rubs against what you find natural, but that's because you were born in the upside down. But I'm ready to redeem you to the right side up, which is his heavenly kingdom. And today we're going to discuss the last observation that we've made, and there are many, holy mackerel, about the differences between God's kingdom and our world. But today we're going to be looking at the fact that in this upside-down earthly kingdom, everyone wants to live for the now, for the temporary. You get what you can get while the getting is good. And God says, no. I've created you guys to last forever, and the things that you do have an impact and ripple through all of eternity. And I want you to live your lives with that in mind. As a matter of fact, there's a verse, or half a verse anyway, that I think captures this even better than I do. It comes from the book of Ecclesiastes. We'll leave that up there for just a minute. Before I read it, though, I want to tell you a little bit about the book of Ecclesiastes, which is a book I love. As a matter of fact, I would recommend that everybody this week, if you get the time, to either read the book of Ecclesiastes, which is not terribly long, it's found in the Old Testament, or listen to it. There's a lot of ways that you can do that in a translation that you're comfortable with and makes sense to you. Because there is something that's so amazing, but I want to tell you something about it before it trips you out. Because you'll be reading it, you're like, whoa, is this in the Bible? Right? The author of Ecclesiastes, I'm pretty certain, I think the evidence is fairly clear, is King Solomon. Although that may not be the case. It's certainly God's word. But the speaker in the book of Ecclesiastes calls himself Kohelet, which means preacher or teacher, maybe professor. And this is the thing that has been itching at him, and maybe it's been itching at you. He walks in this same world that we live in, albeit a good long while ago, but not all that much has changed. And he says, you know what? I've noticed something. Everything in this world seems to be completely, the word that's most commonly translated is vanity, but that's not like, oh, look at me, you're so vain style. What it means is like, it's vapor. No matter how much effort you put into it, no matter how much you cling to something here, it just disappears. It ain't right. And he was a man of means, so he explains, look guys, I know what I'm talking about. I have acquired a tremendous amount of wealth. But you know what happens? Everyone else who has wealth, eventually they die, and their wealth goes to people that didn't work for it. And maybe it's your kids, and that makes you happy, but eventually they'll die, and eventually it will be to nothing. It's vanity. It's nonsense. Well, that sort of bums me out. What are we doing here on this world? He says, you know what? I bet I know what it is. I bet the idea is to live righteous. You live as righteous as you can. That firms up everything in this world. He says, wait a minute, no! Because the rain, which is an analogy for disaster, falls on the righteous and the unrighteous alike. You know what I'm talking about? I've seen folks out there who are walking with Jesus and doing everything right, and then boom! Catastrophe! Disaster! And Kohelet, the preacher, would say, that seems a little odd to me. When this knucklehead over here, who oppresses people and he cuts corners, things seem to be going good for him. That's vanity. That's nothing. What's going on here? He lists other things. He says all kinds of earthly pleasure, women, parties, knowledge. All of these things have the same problem. And then he gets to this. And he says, you know what? You know why I've noticed this? He, God, this is something he observes, has put eternity into man's heart, yet so that he cannot find out what God has done from beginning to the end. What the preacher says is, you know what? What most of us, I think, notice, even if sometimes we try to avoid it, it's like a big thing, like an elephant sitting over there. And it's really important. We've got to figure out what that is. But most of us try to live our lives like, no, that's okay. I think I'll just go fishing as much as I can. Or play as many video games as I can. Well, let's get away from hobbies. I think I'll just work as hard as I can and make as much money as I can and spend as much time with my friends as I can, because that thing sort of freaks me out. And that thing is this: that we have been made for eternity, but under the sun, which is a phrase that Kohelet, the preacher, uses like over 20 times. He says, everything we can see down here is temporary and breaks down and it decays like the upside down. And then that's where he sort of leaves us. There are moments in Ecclesiastes where he's going through these cycles and he'll build to a crescendo and you can almost hear him exhaust himself and he'll go, you know what I guess we just got to do is just try to honor God, enjoy your work until someone comes to explain this thing to us. And he did. Someone came from beyond the sun, from the eternity, and brought it to us so that we could see it and feel it and hear it and hug him and touch him and know him so that he can make eternity available and understandable and comprehensible to us in a way that rescues us from the upside down. So I want to give this preview before we explore the rest of my text and what I've prepared, and that is this. This is also in your bulletins. It's this fill in the blank. How you live your lives today will impact yours and others' tomorrows, and maybe even their eternities. This is the burden that the preacher from Ecclesiastes felt, and it's a burden that I feel very often. Nathan, the way you live your today will impact your tomorrow, other people's tomorrow, and maybe even their eternities. Do you think about that? Do you consider that, Nathan? Or do you only ever live for the now? Eternity is a really big concept. And as Ecclesiastes 3:11, the second half of that verse told us, it's been placed into our hearts, but sometimes let's not jump all the way there. Let's think about something a little bit more manageable. I, probably along with many of you, would like to be a little bit more fit, right? It has benefits. Shed a little weight, your knees don't ache as much, you look a little nicer on the beach and stuff like that. However, I frequently make short-term decisions that are only about living in the now. Like drinking a whole mess of root beer, right? That is contrary to my short-term goal. So here's the thing. I sometimes find it hard to live in the now, not for eternity, but even for a few months from now. Vacation, on the beach, family, embarrassing Rachel, seeing me. I'm just kidding. I'm fearfully and wonderfully made, as are the rest of you. But you understand what I'm saying? That in this upside-down world, we've been so conditioned to live for the now that set eternity aside. Sometimes we find it hard to make decisions that benefit just a little bit later. And the reason I bring that up is because the Apostle Paul in 1 Timothy 4:8, it won't be up on the screen, he pointed out, he said, you know what? Bodily training is of some value. But godliness is of value in every way, as it holds promises for the present life and also the life to come. When I struggle to make decisions that are a benefit to me a little ways into the future for my life now, I think that proves I'm certainly not thinking about eternity. What can I do to break the mold and break the habits of this upside-down, broken world and start saying, God, you've set me up for eternity, and you've revealed it to me in your Son, Jesus. How do I live now, thinking about eternity, my eternity and the eternities of those I interact with? Our main text, at least our largest text, which is also printed in your bulletins, is from Luke chapter 12. We're going to go there right now. A little bit of background. This is during Jesus' earthly ministry. He's walking around, he's teaching, he's preaching, he's explaining things to different people. And on this day, this incident happened. Let's take a look. Someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the family inheritance with me." You ever have this happen to you? You're trying to live. Yes, thank you, Terry. Yes, I have had this happen to me. I'm trying to live my life for eternity. I'm trying to show my kids about eternity. I'm trying to teach and disciple, and even, I'm the one who's benefiting from the most about eternity. And someone strolls up and gives you something that could not be more now and insignificant. Who does this to us the most, babe? The girls. Jesus' response is so funny. One thing that I like to point out as often as I can, that Jesus, the second person of the Trinity, is fully God and fully man. And this is one of those verses that reminds me of it. Verse 14. But he, Jesus, said to him, "Man, who appointed me a judge or arbitrator over you?" I'm not exactly sure he said it in that inflection. Actually, I'm pretty confident he probably did. You guys remember when Jesus turned the water into wine? That it was at a wedding and they ran out of wine and his mom came and told him. If you've ever been reading in a translation, I usually read in very what we call wooden translations. It's like a very one-to-one. It can sometimes be hard to understand, but I think it reveals things to me. I usually have a different translation, New Living Translation, alongside it to help me. But he said to his mom, when she says, "Jesus, they are out of wine," he said, "Woman, what does that have to do with me?" But that isn't how it sounded, okay? It probably would have sounded like this. "Well, I'm sorry to hear that, ma'am, but what does that have to do with me?" So maybe he was saying, "Well, sir, who appointed," but I prefer to hear it, "Man, who appointed me judge and arbiter over you?" Because Jesus, I can almost feel it isn't sinful, but a righteous frustration. Guys, I'm trying to show you the truths of eternity. And this could not be more temporary. Why did these guys ask him about dividing the inheritance to begin with? Well, in tradition of the Jewish folks, the firstborn son would get a double portion of inheritance. And it seems like the guy who's complaining doesn't think that's right. Take it up with God. It's his law. And he's wanting Jesus to give some sort of absolution. "No, you guys got to divide this up fairly." But then Jesus says this. As I see this movie playing out in my mind, "Man, who made me judge and arbiter of you?" All right, how can I bring things back to an eternal perspective? Verse 15. Then he said to them, "Beware and be on guard against every form of greed. For not even when one has an abundance does his life consist of his possessions." That's a beautiful statement. That's the sort of thing we can make one heck of a Christian verse image out of that one. But one thing I love about Jesus is you could say the right thing to me every time, but you know what works better? A picture, a story, a little bit of story time with Jesus. And he shares with us this parable, verse 16. "And he told them a parable saying, the land of a rich man was very productive." Let's pause. I am so thankful to live here on the Eastern Shore amongst all of this agriculture, because it winds up being a big piece of imagery throughout Scripture, especially the New Testament. So we can understand that. You ever be riding down past a field? Let's say here recently, and there was a wheat field. I saw one. I have one in my mind. I was like, "Man, that field reminds me of the parable of the wheat and the tares right there. That field's not doing so well." But then I ride by another field, and it is looking nice. Amber waves of grain, y'all understand. Oh, beautiful for spacious skies, right? Well, Jesus says one of these guys, there's a guy, I want you to see it in your mind. His field has done awesome. Very productive. Verse 17. "And he began reasoning to himself, saying, what shall I do, since I have no place to store my crops?" Did you guys ever, I'm not advocating that you watch this show, although I'm fairly confident that probably a lot of us had. You guys remember Friends? There was one time where Chandler was in a conversation with Joey, and Joey was an actor, and he was doing well, and he was complaining about something. He said, "Oh no, I'm handsome and losing weight without exercising, and my wallet's too small for my 50s. That's how I feel about this guy. His field is doing so well. He's like, "Oh man, I can't even store all this abundance." I don't know if there's ever been a time in my life where I experienced that. My fear is maybe there was, and all I thought was, "Man, this is great." And I didn't think, maybe God's trying to tell me something about eternity. Well, this guy didn't think that either. Verse 18. "Then he said, this is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and build larger ones. And there I will store all my grain and my goods." Verse 19. "And I will say to my soul," soul, you ever be talking to yourself and you refer to yourself, "Hey, soul." I doubt that's what this guy said. It's a story. What that means is this. There's a conversation that was happening at the core that he couldn't edit if he wanted to. You understand what I mean? At the center. He may not even have been aware of it. This is what he says. He says to his soul, soul, you have many goods laid up. Good job, bro. For many years to come, take your ease, eat, drink, and be merry. It's not a bad plan. It's very Dave Ramsey, you know what I mean? He laid that stuff up, and he is good to go. Then something happens that he wasn't aware of. Verse 20. But God said to him, you fool, this very night your soul is required of you. And now who will own what you have prepared? This is just like what Kohelet was saying in Ecclesiastes. I've worked hard, guys. I've hustled. And I have stacked those ducats, stacks on stacks on stacks, right? But when I pass, what does it amount to? I'm reading this story to my girls. Has anyone ever heard of the Sugar Creek Gang? There's some novels. If you haven't, I highly recommend them. They're about a bunch of rambunctious rascal boys, but they're believers. One of them especially, Little Jim. I don't have time to go into it. Really good. Sugar Creek Gang. But in one of these stories, there's a man who winds up being captured by the swamp robber. They're super. I want to explain the whole story to you. This is the important part. He had saved up a lot of money. And while he was on this long journey, he had buried it at home. He said to himself, you know what? That's not right. Anything can happen to me. He wants to come home, dig that up, so it can be used for something useful and loving. Which I don't think means he doesn't get some root beer every now and then. Right? It's like an image of happiness for me, just innocent. This is the thing that a lot of us probably don't notice. But we don't know when time is up. We spend so much time living for the now that we forget, no, we've been built for eternity. And this is how Jesus closes it down, verse 21. Verse 21. So is the man who stores up treasure for himself and is not rich towards God. I understand what storing up treasure for myself is. At least I think I do. At least for me, it's not money. Rachel helps us store up some treasure, right? She keeps it tight. She really helps me. She's a financial advisor in our family. I store up other kinds of treasures. You might call me a pack rat, right? I collect guitars, even ones that aren't so useful or functional, and amps, and fishing lures, and just a whole bunch of stuff that this particular kind of honky nerd likes, right? Those are the things that I'm into. And that's fine for what they are, but they are super temporary. How do I develop richness toward God? What does that look like? I want to shed the misunderstanding of living for the now, that broken, upside-down feature, and start living for eternity. You know what? This was a cool story that Jesus told, but actually it literally happened just this way in history. We know this story from the Bible. You guys ever read the book of Daniel? So he's captured and taken to Babylon. They are training him and his 4 friends, who they later renamed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, in the ways of their foreign wisdom, which is pretty cool, education, right? But constantly they are tested and checked by whether or not they're going to live for the now and take the easy way out. Worship the statue, bow down in praise when the trumpets, or face the fire. Living for the now would say, you know what? Fire, hot, now, bow. Right? Oh, that rhymed. They said, no. We've been built and made for eternity. And even in this foreign land, we're not going to bow to the statue. We won't worship when the trumpets blow. We will only worship and pray to our God. And on one occasion, after they had demonstrated that they live for the eternity, that is where they are focused. Something happened. A new king comes to power named Belshazzar. Nebuchadnezzar was a decent king. He had his errors, but it really does seem like God disciplined him like a son. I actually have some confidence that we'll see Nebuchadnezzar in heaven. He writes this letter after some of the amazing things that Daniel reveals. He tells the whole nation that Daniel's God is the Most High God. Sounds like evangelism to me. Sounds like disciple making. Who knows? We'll see. Belshazzar, on the other hand, I'm pretty sure no. Yeah. He's throwing this raucous party, right? And in this party, they are drinking and getting crumped from the golden goblets from the temple that they stole. Which is pretty disrespectful to begin with. But consider the setting. Their city is under siege from the Persians. Has anyone ever been more delusional? Has anyone ever been living more for the now than eternity in all of history? Oh, they've laid siege to our city? No problem. DJ, pump it up! Right? Belshazzar. And eventually, God is sufficiently disgusted that his own hand, or at least, a manifestation of his hand appears and writes these words on the wall. Belshazzar is tripping out. He's like, what was in that drink, right? But he says, I I will make anyone in this kingdom, he says, a third in the kingdom. That could mean one of two things. Either third in command, which is one way, or I'll appoint you to a position of which there are only three. Right? And nobody seems to understand it, but someone says, hey, there was this guy from the previous regime. He's pretty old now. That surprises me sometimes to think about that. Daniel was not young by the time this event happened. Maybe he knows. Daniel rolls up in there, and there's an opportunity for some promotion. Become a third, right? One of these rulers. He takes a look. Belshazzar explains to him. He says, okay, thanks. You can hang on to that promotion, though. Because the words which said, mene, mene, tekel, upharsin, or parson, I struggle with pronouncing that. Farson or parson, Dad? Okay, both. Farson. And what it means is, you've been weighed, you've been measured, you found wanting. God says, I've looked at you, Belshazzar. The Bible elsewhere tells us that God raises up nations' leaders, and you have not been doing it correctly, and tonight, it's over. Daniel served in the next regime of Persia with distinction, and by his example, the nation of Israel lived through the Persian regime, the Greek regime, all the way to the Roman regime, when Messiah came. And there are those who, when living for the now, I don't mean to get down on the nation of Israel, because frankly we're all this way, but we have their benefit in the story. A lot of them live for the now constantly. Oh man, it stinks to be a slave in Egypt. Then you're out in the desert. Man, it was better to be a slave in Egypt than now, the now, the now, and never eternity. Maybe not never, but rarely. I'm guilty of it. Living for the now, instead of the hereafter. For my own reward, which the Bible outlines that there are ways for your experience of the new heaven and the new earth to be maximized. Isn't that exciting? Why'd God explain it to us if not to want it and pursue it? But actually a thing that grips me even tighter is this. Let's take a look at this. Could we jump ahead to Matthew 6:19? Here we go. This is a passage that we're probably pretty familiar with, because lots of churches, including our own, by the way, whenever we do a series about financial stewardship, maybe even we want to talk about giving, we bring up this passage, which it applies to. But it only applies to that because it applies to something much larger, and I want us to hear it that way today. Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 6:19-21, do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. Has anyone ever been robbed? Yeah, I see your hand, baby. We moved to North Carolina, just got married, weren't married a week, moved down there, got our first apartment. We were psyched. Boom! Robbed. Every piece of electronics they could pick up, except our old, tube TV. And there was a greasy forehead print. They tried to take it, and they said, nah, it ain't even worth it. Thieves break in and steal. Moth and rust and salt water destroy. Right? That's what happens in the now. Instead, verse 20, store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroy, and where thieves do not break in or steal. Verse 21, for where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Amen. Just as we said before, how can I be rich towards God, as Jesus said at the end of Luke? How do I store up treasure in heaven? I started thinking to myself, maybe you've heard me say this before. I talked to it with Billy the other day while we were lifting weights. I said, how do we store up treasure in heaven, man? I want to make a long-term investment. Even in the now, I was speaking to a financial advisor. He says, look, you got to think about the future. But even my future is temporary. What about my eternity? What treasure can be brought with me? Other than my own life, secure in the Lamb's book of life, which all of us ought to make that investment in our own eternity by accepting Jesus' free gift of salvation by faith. Confess your sins, believe in him, and know with certainty your eternity is spoken for. But how do I take treasure with me? I've heard this phrase. It may be a little bit cheesy, but it still grips me. If this is something, sometimes cliches can rub me the wrong way. I like some of them and I don't like others. If this is one that rubs you the wrong way, try to hear it with fresh ears for the first time. Have you ever heard someone say, I've never seen a hearse hauling a U-Haul? Yep. Right? That's a pretty old phrase, but it falls on my ears anew. That's right. There's no treasure in heaven that I can bring with me, save for one thing that I'm aware of. And you can bring the people you love, provided they give their eternity to Jesus. I've said a lot of things sort of criticizing the now, and I did it by way of exaggeration so we can make the comparison. But look, even the Apostle Paul said physical fitness is of some benefit. And every moral philosopher that I have ever read says that a little bit of fun and frivolity and, recreation, it's not only acceptable, it's sort of necessary. In a way, if there's not enough of it, it can mess you up in other ways because we're just people. But is my attention focused on eternity? And the way that I'll know, the way that I can examine it for myself is this. Does my heart ache for people who don't yet know him? That there are people who, unless something changes, they're going to spend eternity disconnected from him. I actually think that's one of the things that Kohelet, the preacher from Ecclesiastes, was saying. Eternity is set in men's hearts, whether they're with Jesus or not. The state, the condition of that eternity is in contention. If there is anybody in here who's maybe hearing this for the first time, you're thinking, man, I don't really know about the state of my eternity. Well, we can tighten that up. We can lock that down right now. Because it is not that complicated a thing to do, although it is amazing. As a matter of fact, it's so uncomplicated, I think in many ways that's the stumbling blocks for a lot of people who hear it the first time, the second time, the third time. They say, that's it. I'm about to explain it now, and this is it. Every single person born into this broken and upside down world is this sin monster. Even my two beautiful little girls. Little sinnerlings is what I call them. They came into this world and they were like cool and they were cute, but if you could see spiritually, they're like, blah, right? And so was I. Yeah, so was I. So were you. And that is the trajectory we are on. Remember what I said about zombies before? Born, moving around, living, but spiritually dead. And on our way to spending eternity in that state. Why is this the case? I should actually start there. Because God didn't start it this way. When he created humanity, loved us infinitely, still does, by the way, had a perfect relationship with us. Our first parents, the first humans, Adam and Eve, walked with him as friends, had this incredible relationship with him in the garden. But the thing that broke it, the thing that turned this world upside down was sin. It did it then. The shockwave of that sin has rippled throughout the rest of history, and our sins continue to do it to this day. When we say, Jesus, how can we fix this? God, how can we fix this? He says, you can't. You cannot. Nothing under the sun can fix it, says the preacher from Ecclesiastes. But someone from beyond the sun, someone from eternity can, and his name was and is Jesus. God came to earth, put on flesh, to become this most astonishing hybrid, but not a new, it is a new thing, but not a blending of two things, completely God, completely man. This is the ingredient that was necessary so that he could take on all the sin of man, though he'd never committed any himself, and die to satisfy all the holiness and righteousness of God, which cannot coexist with sin. Matter of fact, it's not an inability of his, it's an inability of ours. When sin enters into the presence of that holiness, it is consumed and erased from the radiance of his glory. But as Jesus took it on himself, he said, that's not the problem anymore, guys. Well, what remains? Well, I have this free gift to give you. Forgiveness and justification. Forgiveness is when your sin is taken, and you say, Jesus, take this. I don't want this anymore. Take this muck and slime from this upside-down world, and please take it from me. He said, you got it on the cross. He said, I got something for you. I got all this righteousness and all this glory, and I'd be happy to give it to you if you would accept it by faith. The most common way that we do that is we say a prayer. And the prayer just puts those two aspects of this transformation into a few sentences for you to consider, do I want that? And then to take hold of it. It is an act of the will, but not in the sense of pull yourself up by the bootstraps will. It's not a will where you impose your will and you work for it. It's a will where you surrender and say, I can't. I need you. If you have not done that yet, please do it right now with me. There's a verse. Can we jump 2 slides ahead, bud? It says this, probably one of the most memorized verses within Scripture, and for good reason. Sometimes I get scared that something that's so important can become cliche, but let's read it now. Try to hear it with new ears. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him will not perish, but have eternal life. A life that lasts forever, and an eternal kind of life where we get to share it with others.